Welcome to RPG Heroes, a podcast where every other week I speak to a true hero in the realm of role-playing games about their journey, their craft, and their views. As your host, I will focus on one particular aspect of this wonderful hobby for the interview, regale you with stories from my own 25 years of experience with role-playing games, and reflect on the major takeaways from the interview. Join me now on this epic journey and awaken the hero in you. Welcome to episode 9 of RPG Heroes, where we will delve into our main topic, solo RPGs. And today we're going to be talking to the very generous Shawn Tomkin, creator of the Ironsworn RPG, which is an award-winning product that can be played solo, co-op, and led by a games master. Super interesting. Now, those of you that listen all the way to the end of each episode might be thinking, Shawn Tomkin, I thought you said we were going to listen to John Harper today. Yes, that was the plan, but we had to move that interview, so now we're talking to Shawn Tomkin first. But don't worry, for those of you that were very keen to listen to the interview with John Harper that is coming in a future episode, I'm actually talking to him this week. And the topics are certainly adjacent, since the RPG Ironsworn is rather narrative in its approach, just like Blades in the Dark. And this week I have yet another new patron to thank, and this time the new patron is actually Brendan Faulkner. Thank you so much for joining my Patreon and supporting this show, Brendan. Much appreciated. And of course, again, those people that listen very carefully to my podcast will probably think, hey, isn't that the name of the guy he interviewed last week? Yep, that's right. So make sure that you go and listen to that episode if you didn't already, and check out his project Roanoke. In other exciting news about this podcast, we have just gone over 1,000 downloads, which is just amazing. I just started in the beginning of January, and back then I never would have thought that we would be able to have so many downloads in such a short amount of time. So for all of you that listen to this podcast, thank you so much. It really means the world to me that you take the time to listen to me talk and listen to my interviews and to interact with me online. So, yeah, thanks. And for those of you that follow me on Twitter, you probably noticed, because I got 1,000 downloads, I am running a small giveaway of Drive-Thru RPG vouchers. So if you haven't seen that yet, go and check out my profile on Twitter at RPG Heroes 1, and you'll see the pinned tweet that shows you how to enter the competition. And good luck, everybody. Now, let's dive into our main topic, solo RPGs. Solo RPGs. So playing on your own. You might even say playing with yourself, but that might be taking it a bit too far. So what is that? Well, I think the name says it all. You play a role-playing game by yourself with nobody else around. And some people might think, well, why on earth would I do that? Because like many people, I also really enjoy the social aspect of role-playing games. Sitting around the table, or these days, sitting around the Zoom or Discord or whatever it is, and having a chat and kind of bouncing ideas off each other and getting that creative flow going, that's something I really enjoy. I also notice that I really like playing these games with my friends. But there are plenty of reasons to try playing a role-playing game on your own. One good reason could be simply that you do not have the friends to play these games with at the moment, or these friends are not available because of all kinds of reasons. Maybe your friends don't like playing online and we're all stuck in our home, so, well, then you cannot play with them. Maybe you do not have a good internet connection to play online yourself, or you're maybe hesitant to play online for whatever reason it is. So not having access to the people that you want to play with, it could be a really good reason. But another good reason could be simply that you want to experiment with a game system before you run it for your friends. It could also be time related. Perhaps you want to play role-playing games with your friends, but time is an issue, and you want to have the ability to play for half an hour perhaps, and then put the game away and get back to work or get back to your family life and then pick it up a few hours later. If you want to do that with friends, that can be very difficult because when you have a session with friends, you prefer to have a few hours, I suppose, and not half an hour here, half an hour there. And this could be a wonderful way to give yourself that time to play role-playing games, but to really be able to do it on the fly. Ooh, I have half an hour lunch break. Let's play an RPG while I eat my sandwich. So plenty of reasons why. But then the question is how? How on earth do you play a role-playing game by yourself? And luckily, there are a few books out there that you can use that can help you out. There are game systems developed specifically for solo play, and there are game systems that facilitate solo play with some tables, etc. Funny thing is that the first time I actually got to play solo was not really an RPG, but kind of an RPG adjacent war game, and it's called Rangers of the Shadow Deep. If you enjoy the tactical side of combat in role-playing games, this could be a wonderful thing for you to try out. It's really a great game, especially if you already own some miniatures and terrain, then it's not really a big investment. And what this game does is it's a war game, but it has role-playing game aspects, such as you have a character that levels up, he has a few henchmen, or she obviously, and you get equipment, etc. So it's really a lot like a role-playing game character. Also the quests that you undergo or the missions, they have role-playing game aspects to them. So you're trying to reveal secrets, you're trying to figure out what's going on in the kingdom, etc. And that game has a solo mode, and it manages this solo mode through a really effective, simple AI decisions that you get to make for the bad guys or the monsters that you're fighting, and also with the story revealing itself through cards that you draw from a deck, and then you look up on a table what you find out, and what you don't find out, well, you don't. And it has a really great timing aspect to it, because each mission is worth a certain amount of cards. Once you've drawn all the cards, the mission is over. Time's up. Either you won or you didn't. Another very helpful thing that you can try out if you want to play a role-playing game solo is to play a game that's specifically designed for it, or that has all this information in the book, how to deal with NPC decisions, monster behavior, and all that kind of stuff. One very famous one is the Mythic GM emulator, which you can find on DriveThruRPG. And it has a whole bunch of random tables that you roll on for all kinds of stuff that normally the game master would decide for you as a player. And there are more of such emulators available. Actually, I'll put a link in the show notes to a great article from rpgready.com, which lists a whole bunch of them and it kind of explains what they do. Another helpful thing that you need when you want to play a role-playing game solo is some kind of way to keep your notes. And of course, there's all kinds of ways to do this, but it is important to do so. Because normally in an RPG, you sit around a table and you're like, what did we do last time? And together you remember much more than on your own. And some of the details will really matter. Another thing that you can use to kind of get ideas going, to get unstuck in all kinds of situations, is to use things that give you random prompts. So, for instance, there's Rory's story cubes, which are a wonderful thing. Also, if you happen to have kids and you want to tell them a story and you're stuck for ideas. But it also really helps for solo RPGs. And then there are specific role-playing games that are aimed at solo play, or at least that facilitate it all by themselves, which means you don't really need an extra GM emulator, etc. next to it. And one of such games is Ironsworn. And like I said in the beginning, we're going to talk to the creator of this wonderful game, Shawn Tomkin. Welcome to the show, Shawn Tomkin. Shawn is the creator of the Any-winning Ironsworn tabletop RPG, which you can download for free. And to top that, a recent tweet drew to my attention that when you buy a product of his on itch.io, I think I pronounced that correctly, Shawn makes that same product free for a person who would like it but is dealing with financial hardship, which, of course, in the current situation is just simply amazing. So, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, wonderful. So, for those listeners that have no clue what Ironsworn is, can you give us the blurb? What is Ironsworn?
Well, the short blurb is it's a tabletop RPG of perilous quests. The longer blurb is it's a fantasy tabletop role-playing game that takes place in a dark fantasy setting called the Ironlands, and its main sort of, I guess, sort of linchpin sort of principle in terms of gameplay is that it supports three different gameplay modes. You can play it at your table with your friends in the normal sort of what I call the guided fashion, which is a GM and players, and GM sort of controlling the NPCs and help guide the outcome of your actions. And co-op, which is two or more people playing without a GM, so a GM-less mode. And then solo, which is just you by yourself without a GM, and the system helps you interpret actions and introduce new surprises into your narrative.
Yeah, and and that's kind of what drew my attention in the beginning when I heard about Ironsworn. I thought, okay, solo. I don't know if I would do that, but it's cool that it's there. But then there's also these two other modes. So when you started to design the game, what was your the initial idea? Was it always going to be three modes, or did you start off with one of the three?
I've always liked hacked at games. It's just like even, back to the 70s with the original like D&D, I would sit there and hack at things. So I've always been a little bit fascinated with mechanics. So Ironsworn just started as looking at the Apocalypse World system, which is a pretty popular system for game design. There's a big community around it. They're generally known as powered by the Apocalypse games, which are games that are leveraging or inspired by that engine that was developed by Vincent McKay Baker. Um, Pretty foundational, I think design platform for a lot of game designers these days. So anyway, just started with exploring that system a little bit, looking at hacks, looking at alternatives to games like Dungeon World that are a little bit more fit to the kind of like fantasy sort of themes and settings I like, which is a little bit more Iron Age, a little lore fantasy, a little grittier. Um, and just through the process of doing that, and sort of the reality of my RPG life of having challenges, getting games, getting involved with online groups and having a lot of cancellations and dealing with the frustrations of that. It'd be like, it'd be lovely to just have a game I can play at home or play with my wife and not necessarily have to be the GM. I'm kind of the forever GM, like a lot of people are, irrespective of who I'm playing with. And sometimes I like to play. So,
Mm,
I looked at the way Apocalypse World, the way the moves um, function, this idea of having triggers with outcomes that are well defined. At some point, I'm like, what can I just make this work without a jam? Like, can there be enough inertia here and enough still player choice, but also introducing some aspects of the GM in terms of these narrative outcomes to your actions that can allow this to be solo. I had tried solo games in the past, always found them to be interesting, but a little bit unsatisfying, just the way
mm,
they were sort of set up. I just found them to be a little aimless. Sometimes that's probably a me thing, not necessarily the game thing. It's just
mm.
you sort of design the games you want to play, right? In the end,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
yeah, that's where it all came from, and just sort of, I'd say, relatively early in development, I sort of had that epiphany is maybe a too big a word for it, but just sort of realization of where I should take the game in terms of supporting those modes.
Yeah. Okay. And so when it comes to solo RPGs, what kind of games did you try?
Mythic is a pretty well known sort of, they call it a GM emulator. So a lot of stuff in Ironsworn is inspired directly from that in terms of some of the what I call oracles, which are sort of narrative and creative prompts for events within the story. Some of the moves where you're sort of asking yes no questions, things like that, getting answers from the system based on likelihood. All that came out of my experiences with Mythic, and then some small like journaling games and things like that. So I always found that was a little bit too much like a creative writing exercise, and I'm a little, although I do enjoy creative writing, I'm also a little bit lazy when I'm gaming. I just like to sort of keep like simple notes and move things along pretty quickly. So
Yeah, shouldn't feel like work. Also, maybe.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine that. Okay. Yeah. So Mythic. Yeah, definitely. I'll definitely have a look at that, and I'll put some links to it in the show notes. So that's interesting. Is I also I understand your notion of being the forever GM. That's something that seems to happen to me, and I think to a lot of my listeners as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, I also remember trying to run different RPGs together with my wife, and also feeling like, yeah, one of us has to be the GM then, which is probably me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so I like the idea that you can play co-op, and it,
And yeah, and I think that's actually like the sweet spot for the system is like
Mhm.
2 or 3 player co-op. I just think you have a little bit more as I guess relatively well known as Ironsworn is sort of like this one of the options for solo role playing. I do like to think that it's sort of like it hits its sweet spot when you've got a little bit more creative energy at the table, a little bit more to bounce off of. So,
yeah,
I love to hear about couples playing at home and siblings and all that sort of stuff, just because I think it's an opportunity to, introduce people in your household into RPGs, and especially relevant in this time when we're all stuck in our relative isolation here with members of our household. Like, let's do
yeah.
some gaming, roll some dice, see what
Yeah,
happens.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Stave off the cabin fever.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And speaking of which, so you launched a podcast, right, called Ask the Oracle,
Yep.
where you play co-op this particular game with your son.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I started that just as I used to get a lot of questions about actual play videos and podcasts featuring the game, and until late last year, there really wasn't much of that. There's been a
Mhm.
little bit of a upswing and people playing it online and stuff. There's a fair number of Twitch streams and YouTube videos of people playing the game now, but back then there wasn't much. So
Mm,
it started out just as a way for me to sort of walk through, explain the mechanics, do a little bit of like designer commentary, why things work the way they do, or and hopefully try to be a little bit like of an entertaining, somewhat actual play as well. So we've
yeah,
been having fun with that. I think I initially planned just to do a few episodes to sort of get through the core mechanics of the game, but now we kind of want to see what happens. So we're still playing.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I just finished listening to, I think, episode 4 or 5. I
Oh,
think
great. Yeah.
5. Yeah, you guys arrived at. Well, maybe I shouldn't put spoilers in the episode. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But yeah, I'm enjoying that a lot, and I'm beginning to finally see how it would work. This, yeah, with co-op play. Because when I read about it, I thought, well, yeah, I'm so used to this format of having a game master who has a plot and all these things, and then there's these players, and they're trying to kind of
Yeah.
fight the bad guys, and you throw plot twists in their face. And
Yeah.
I thought, yeah, who's going to do that if there isn't a game master? And
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is you're all the game master, right?
mm,
Although there's terms like game master emulator for things like the Mythic system,
mhm,
I've always sort of been of the opinion it's not really a game master emulator, because you're putting on the game master hat, taking it off, putting on the player hat,
yeah,
back on. But hopefully, you have a system that makes that a little bit um, doesn't show the seams too much, or doesn't show the wizard behind the curtain working the levers too much, that can
mm,
still sort of introduce a sense of uncertainty. And also just building in things like mechanical challenges into the system, where there's things like resource management. So it's not just a creative exercise. A lot of stuff I hear from people, or I see in posts where somebody talks about Ironsworn and somebody sort of comes in with a pithy, well, isn't that just writing a book? And the
huh,
answer is no. Writing a book
no,
is hard, number one. It's a whole different exercise, but
yeah,
it's a game. There you have some narrative control and creative freedom, but not total narrative control, because the
mm,
dice will um, send things spinning out of control,
yeah.
most likely.
Yeah. Although I could imagine if you have a great game, that you might turn it into a written piece.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Has that happened already, or?
I mean, there's people who write prose play summaries, which are awesome. And there was people doing that back in the very early previews of the game. I
Mm,
initially released the game sort of as a series of chapter by chapter previews, just as I was creating it. I
yeah.
tossed it out there. So, and people would do gameplay reports that were written as prose with like mechanical sidebars. So,
Yeah. Okay. Oh, that's great. So it's kind of like it becomes a fiction after the fact, kind of, or
Yeah, and
yeah,
that's a choice you're making when you're playing a solo role-playing game. Something I recommend in the book is that you do keep some sort of record, and the reason is that if you're playing solo, it can feel a little ephemeral, right? When you
yeah,
have a group of people, you have that sort of shared reality of the story that you've created together. You can
yeah,
talk about it later. Like just the fact that it sort of exists between you gives it more solidity. So when you're by yourself, it can all feel a little bit light and weightless, and it doesn't exist beyond you. So just the act of taking notes, keeping some sort of record, like helps sort of cement it a little bit and ground it a little bit more
yeah,
for you. I think feel a little bit less ephemeral.
yeah, yeah. I can imagine that. And so the thing is, that what I said at the intro is that what surprised me when I looked into Ironsworn the first time, I thought, why is it free? I didn't get it. So I thought maybe it's like a preview, or it's like a small version, or maybe it's just really short, like 10 pages, kind of like, oh, I guess you can play on your own. Um, and then I thought, okay, well, I'll pull the trigger. Why not? I mean, it's free. Uh,
Sure.
and I was surprised to see I get 11 PDFs for absolutely $0.
Is it
Um,
11? Oh boy.
yeah.
Guess I haven't counted.
I'm looking at my
Yeah.
drive-through RPG library. It's 11. Oh my god, yeah. So we get different worksheets, which are handy, I think, to keep track of things. You get the rules book plus a rules reference, which is nice.
Yeah.
Um, and you get a rule book that is made for widescreens. I've never actually seen that before. I mean, I don't know. It's probably not unique, but
Yeah, there's some publishers who do like the spreads version and the singles version of the book. So
yeah,
that's what I was inspired by there.
this is a great idea. Yeah. Um, yeah, and then you get the assets. So you can print them yourself and cut them out and all that kind of these asset cards. That's
Yeah.
great. Yeah. Um, so that makes me wonder, do people mostly just download the PDF and that's it? Or, I mean, I don't want to pry into your business, but
I mean, it's hard to
large.
say. I don't really have the numbers. I get a
Mm,
little bit of numbers just by virtue of like downloads on Drive Through RPG. I don't track on my website as available from download to the website, and I think the bulk
mm,
of downloads are probably there.
yeah.
So there's upwards of, I think, 40,000 downloads on Drive Through, and
Wow.
I will say a fraction of those have bought the print book. So I guess the answer is yes, probably, and then all the people on the website, but
Right.
um, you know, the print version is done very well. I think people feel a sense of generosity or
Hmm.
a willingness to support the game just based on the fact that that initial offering is free. So
Yeah.
even if they're tend to do PDFs and other things, I think a lot of people go and buy the book just as a way of supporting it.
Mm. Yeah, because what I do before my interviews is I tend to Google my guest and see, oh, what else did they do in the world of RPGs, and I kept googling. uh, so this is actually your first foray into RPGs, is that right?
Well, it's my first, thing that I've put out there.
Yeah.
I've had a couple small things, a couple like sort of, you know, um, hacks I've done for systems that are 1 or 2 page sort of, rule hacks or things like that.
Hmm.
Or I used to do a lot of character sheet stuff and rule references just because I'm into sort of design and layout, and I would do that for my own purposes and then share it. But I've got like writers who write novels and have tons of unfinished novels in their drawer. I have tons of unfinished RPGs in my virtual drawer in my hard drive. So um,
Ah,
it's just the first thing I've sort of like really buckled down and worked through and
yeah.
put out there.
Right. And did you expect it to take off the way it did, or?
No, I mean, it's it's all relative, right?
Hmm.
It's moderate level of success and then niche of RPGs. But certainly, yeah, I didn't expect to see people talking about it and
Mm.
see the level of participation we have on my Discord server. With a couple thousand people now on the Discord
Wow.
server, and
Yeah.
So yeah, and just the level of sort of discord over the game is great. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, that's wonderful. So, so there's a few products out now. So there's the game itself, obviously.
mhm.
There's Delve, which allows you to do a dungeon crawl, I believe, in your game. Wow, or is it?
Yeah, Delve was it started as like I used to get the question all the time, how do I do dungeon crawls and
Hmm.
Ironsworn? So it started as sort of my answer to that, and it started with just, oh, I'll just do some variations on the mechanics here and pick up a couple of these gameplay loops and give them a little bit more detail and put it out as like a 10-page thing. But then I just sort of kept adding. It sort of became my platform just for a lot of rule options and new setting info and things like that. So it turned into a fairly robust supplement just through that process, which
Yeah.
I think had some cool new stuff.
Cool. Yeah. Hey, and so you say you have a drawer or a computer full of other ideas. So what can we expect from you in 2020, 2021? What exciting things can we secretly already know about?
And I'll probably be focused on Ironsworn sort of stuff for the near future. I'm working on the focus for me right now is working on a sci-fi supplement, sort of Ironsworn in space is the easy way to describe it. Just
Uh-huh.
taking some of the themes and the baseline mechanics and adapting it to a futuristic, gritty futuristic setting.
Yeah.
And then there's some other supplements in the hopper, but everything takes a long time. Everything's, I'm a particularly slow writer, I think, a particularly slow designer in some
Oh.
respects. So it takes time I'm realizing how difficult. Nothing else this exercise has taught me great respect for game designers because
Mm.
it's a tough thing to do.
I can imagine. Yeah. It's not just writing; it's also game design, right? It's about making it actually work and making it click, and you
Yeah,
know,
there's a lot of disciplines woven in there.
yeah, yeah, I can imagine that. And one of those disciplines has to do with mechanics. So you describe your mechanics as a fiction first mechanic. So what does that mean? How should I envision that?
I mean, the easy way to describe it is just you're always sort of leading with the fiction rather than trying to pigeonhole uh, mechanics into narrative. You let the narrative sort of like that's your base of your pyramid, right? And the
Hmm.
mechanics are meant to support that. So everything you do in the game, you're weaving into the fiction. You envision what is happening. You go to the mechanics to determine the outcome, and then you loop back to the fiction to sort of narrate the result. And part of that is necessary just because the mechanics are relatively lightweight. So the mechanics are not giving you that granular detail that you might get from a crunchier game, if you will,
Yeah.
of what happens within every moment within a fight, for example, right? You're
Hmm.
sort of filling in some of those gaps, interpreting things narratively in order to sort of flesh out the what you envision is what's happening in the game.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, because I play mostly Dungeons and Dragons, Call of Cthulhu, some Starfinder, which is based on
Hmm.
Pathfinder.
Right.
Um, yeah, and like you say, especially Pathfinder, Starfinder, they're very granular.
Yeah.
Um, and the thing is that when I play those games, I also try to lead with the fiction. Always trying to ask the players, just tell me what you want to do,
Yep.
and if a role is required, I'll ask you. But
Yep.
yeah, there's basically two categories of players. Some will go for that, and some will always look at their character sheet. Hey, can I roll? Dot dot dot. And I'm like, well, yeah, okay, sure. But what are you doing? Um,
Yeah, I
yeah.
don't think it's a concept limited to particular games,
Mm,
right? Some games
no.
just hang their hat on it a little bit more, and some games
Yeah.
try to reinforce that just through the mechanics, right? It's
Yeah.
reinforcing you using the fiction and interpreting the fiction to resolve outcomes and things like that, and to give things life. Ironsworn is actually a little bit, I would say, more on the mechanical side than a lot of quote unquote narrative systems.
Mm,
There's a sort of fair bit going on, sort of mechanically,
yeah.
and part of that is just trying to create a GM-less experience that has some engaging hooks. Is inspired by board game resource management and crunchier games like you know D&D or
Hmm.
um, D100 games or things like that, with some of the just the more robust sort of mechanical aspects of that, because I think playing a game is fun, and
Yeah.
when you're playing solo, you or GMless, you have less to bounce off from other players. So I think having those, engaging mechanical hooks and challenging sort of aspects of the game where you've got to like actually sort of think a little bit meta in terms of how to
Mhm.
manage your resources and what capabilities to use when, like all that is pretty fun, I think.
Yeah, yeah. One thing I noticed listening to your actual play and also the actual play on the Mud and Blood podcast, which
Hmm.
is very enjoyable. Um, yeah, is that what keeps coming back to me is this resource management. So there's always either you're going to run out of food, or you're going to run out of what's it called, momentum,
Yep.
or you're going to run out of health, or one of
Yep.
them. So it's always like a trade-off, and I really like that. So what gave you the idea for the balancing all those resources? You mentioned
Yeah,
board
it's
games.
a little bit. It's the biggest part of it was just trying to create gameplay inertia, like gameplay loops, like because like I said, when I was trying solo games or GMless games, a lot of times it would feel a little aimless, right?
Mm,
And what Ironsworn does through its underpinnings are this quest-based structure, right? You define a problem, you swear a vow to go deal with it. So then
yeah.
your character has something to do that's motivating them. But then within that, you have various tracking mechanisms that determine how much progress you're making on that vow. And then you have various resources that are finite that will, you'll suffer hits to as you undertake this quest that will then, force you to, you know, probably go back to civilization, right? To get
Yeah.
help. Um,
Yeah.
Part of that is just because people equal story. So if you're out wandering in the wilderness, you have less opportunity to sort of run into story.
Yeah.
If you're running out of supply, or if you're wounded and need to go to get help, you're going to go find someone to help you. And that person may want their own things or have their own problems. And then all of a sudden you're sort of spinning off into a new gameplay loop. So it's a snowball, right? You start
Yeah.
off on this simple expedition seemingly, and things go wrong, and that snowballs into more story. You take on new quests, and then everything you do is based on swearing those vows and fulfilling those vows, both in the fiction, like it's a thing of the setting that you're
Hmm.
swearing vows. It's very important in the setting, and then mechanically you get rewarded experience for fulfilling them. So
Yeah.
it's the motivation for your character, and it's the motivation for the player.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And so to do anything in the game, when it comes to mechanics, you need dice, right? And this is the first game I ever came across, but yeah, sadly, I'm not familiar with Apocalypse World yet. I'll be looking at it because
It's worth a look for sure. Yeah.
yeah, you made me very curious now. But so what I found very interesting looking at the book, um, was that okay? I need a D6 and I need two D10s. So I thought, okay, that's an interesting combination. Um, but the D10s actually determine kind of what most games would call something like a difficulty class, or the
Hmm.
difficulty you're rolling against.
Yeah.
So is that something that comes from Apocalypse World, or is that something you came up with?
The standard roll in Apocalypse World is you roll two d6s and then you add them up, and then you're trying to hit a particular target
Yeah.
for a strong success or a weak success or a miss.
Mhm. Okay.
7 to 9, 10 plus, and 6 and below,
Yeah.
relative to that.
Right.
For my system, I wanted a little bit more granularity, number one, because I had sort of this resource management layer.
Yeah.
So Ironsworn, unlike some Apocalypse World systems, is a little bit more like sort of the tactical meta nature of like building up bonuses and things like that.
Hmm.
Um, and I kind of like that aspects of the game. Like it's satisfying to get a +3 on a roll or whatever.
Yeah.
And the 2d6 doesn't really allow that without throwing off the mechanical curve entirely.
Mm.
Um, so there's that aspect of it, just looking at alternatives to sort of stretch the mechanical possibilities of the role and the um, the ratio of success and not. And then the other aspect was trying to build in a match mechanic. So rolling doubles on your d10s gives you some sort of twist, either a beneficial twist or a negative twist, depending on your role. And
Mhm.
I've always liked the 10% chance of something interesting happening. So that
Yeah.
was always sort of a foundational thing for me, is like those d10s.
Yeah.
Um, And then finally, I just find it like a little satisfying, sort of chunky little roll. Like you roll two d10s and a d6, and
Yeah.
it's just it. That's one thing I looked at probably 20 different dice mechanics as I was developing the game, trying to get the numbers to line up where I wanted them, and trying to get something that felt good and you could instantly interpret, within a second or two.
Yeah.
And it just, that sad little d6 opposing those two d10s just fits the theme of the game, which is a little bit dire sometimes. So works out.
I like that idea, actually. Yeah, when you think about it, if you look at your dice tray, you see this one little d6 that cannot ever roll higher than a 6. Oh, that's yeah. I never really thought about it like that. All right, and yeah. So basically, the difficulty of any particular roll is determined by these two d10s and kind of by how well you've managed to stack all your bonuses.
Yeah, pretty
Yeah.
much. You've got, you'll add your stat to the d6. It's a,
Hmm.
it's a stat-based game, which
Yeah.
to anybody familiar with, there's 5 stats. So depending on what you're doing, the game will instruct you on which stat to use, or you might have some flexibility based on the situation. And then if you've got any bonuses situationally or based on what the game includes, are called assets, which are basically like character abilities. The analog for D&D 5e would be like feats or something like that, right?
Mm. Yeah.
Then you can add those bonuses to it. And so, it's a lonely little d6, but potentially it's got a little bit of helpers in terms of your stats and the bonuses that you'll add to it that will give it a little bit more capability.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Okay. And so you can play this co-op and you can play this solo, and I think for both those, from what I read and heard so far, that would really work very well. But you can also play it with a game master. So what's the role of the game master then, when really you don't need that person?
It's really the game, like I said, when you're a player, you're either putting on the GM hat or putting on the player hat. If you're playing in guided mode, you just don't have to put on the GM hat as much. You've got somebody facilitating that, helping define the outcomes. The game does not so strictly define outcomes that it doesn't leave room for interpretation, both for you and a game master. So the game master takes that creative load, right? Determines what happens when you fail in action, or helps interpret what happens when you succeed,
Yeah.
helps introduce NPCs, helps move the world along. The nice thing about the game in terms of for game masters, and something that I've always appreciated as game master, number one, I don't like game prep.
Mm.
Speaking of something that feels like work,
Yeah.
it just it feels like work to me. Like I like the at the table, but I tend to over prep if I'm going to prep, and I'll spend hours and hours prepping for a 3-hour session, right? And
Yeah.
it kills my weekend or whatever prepping
Yeah.
for a game. And then it's all, it's out the window in the first 5 minutes, all that preparation anyway.
Yeah.
So it's designed to be a no prep game. You let the players help drive their goals. You react to that. You can adjust like the dials to
Mhm.
your preferences and your players' preferences in terms of how much narrative authority you give them.
Yeah.
So you can ask them a lot of questions about what happens, right?
Mhm.
When they fail a move, like describe what happens to you, right?
Yeah.
Or you can just, take a little bit more narrative authority on yourself. So it's pretty flexible in that regard. It's less about, uh, the GM taking all of that control and building the world and putting the players into it, because there's an assumption that you're going to be help creating the setting together and all have a little bit of a stake in the world and all
Yeah.
have an understanding of what's going on. So, but the GM can, adjust and course correct throughout a session in terms of how much they want to sort of take the GM load on themselves versus sharing it with the players.
Okay. Yeah. 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 And I can imagine also, maybe depending on the group, that this creative load for some players might be a bit much if they are just getting used to this type of game.
Yeah, and you can
Um,
ask, you can ease them into it, right? Maybe it's
mm,
a nice way to introduce. Maybe it's a nice way for your group to transition from a traditional GM-led session into a co-op session where forever
yeah.
GM can now play at the table, right? So
Yeah.
you do a shorter campaign where you're just sort of leading them down that path of giving them more narrative control, asking a lot of questions,
Yeah.
letting them define what they encounter, what happens,
Yeah.
the actions of NPCs, and you give them more and more opportunities to do that, and they'll get comfortable with it. It'll be second nature after a little while.
Yeah. So, and your game is based in this Iron Age kind of really grim, gritty world. What were your fictional kind of inspirations to choose this and to build it?
I think it's a product of kind of like the fantasy I like to read and watch, or
Mm,
having an interest in more historical settings. Even watching shows like Vikings or something like that, and just sort of liking that aesthetic, right?
yeah.
And just I don't know. It's always been that way for me, even in the 70s and 80s of playing D&D, of having a little bit more appeal in sort of the scrappy, sort of non-magical characters,
Mhm.
and having the settings be, uh, a little bit more of leaning into sort of that lower magic, less fantastic aesthetic.
Yeah.
Um, although that said, Ironsworn lets you sort of adjust that dials as well, right? If you want more sort of fantastic, uh, setting, and a little bit more magic, more supernatural creatures, and all those sort of things, you've got opportunities to do that just by adjusting the dials. And that's another part of just doing that if you're playing co-op or guided, of doing that together, that exercise together,
Mm.
and helping everybody sort of have a stake in what the setting feels like.
Yeah, and that's actually a very interesting part of the game as well that I didn't realize was there. So usually when you buy a role playing game of any sort, there's some kind of setting information that tells you this is exactly the world the game takes place in, or they give you nothing. But usually it's the former.
Right.
Um, so I thought, okay, yeah, Iron Age, I can dig that, yeah, and gritty, I like it, and I was thinking, Vikings, that kind of stuff. Um, and I'm from Northern Europe myself, and I've been in Scandinavia quite a lot. So I thought,
Mhm.
okay, yeah, I can dig it, yeah. And then it turns out, actually, you get to do a lot of the world building yourself as you're playing the game. It's again something I'd never come across. And can you tell us a little bit about what made you choose for this, first of all, and second of all, how does it work? Maybe for people who are not familiar with the game.
Yeah, I mean, the approach to the setting is born out of my own sort of, I guess, laziness, or I don't know what the word would be, but um, I, I love looking at like big, thick setting books. Like I love looking at the art. I love, sort of scanning it for little nuggets of ideas, but I tend to zone out. Like it's too much. There's too much detail. Um, I'm not going to encounter 95% of it. Like I just want, give me the broad strokes, let me fill in the details, right? Like draw a sketch on canvas, I'll bring my paints and fill it in. So
Yeah.
that's my preference for the world. And I see a little bit of that in lighter RPGs, just by virtue of the fact that the lighter setting marries to the lighter mechanics, and it's more about narrative flexibility, and um, filling in the blanks of your map, etc., as you play,
Yeah.
and lower prep. But um, traditional RPGs, I think, sort of lean into sort of the heavier, robust setting info. So,
Yeah.
but at the same time, I like to tweak things to my own preferences, and I want to make sure that people who buy the book have that opportunity as well. So that's why there's sort of that formalized, what I call the year truce exercise, where you go through and what are the cultures like, what are the settlements like, what are the people like, what are the government like within these settlements, what do they do for defenses, what's magic like in this place, what are
Mm.
there supernatural beasts and undead, like all those things you sort of go through. And most things have like a low, medium, high setting, right, of sort
Yeah.
of tuning the dial.
Hmm.
um, and you come out of that, and it's been one of the cool things about watching this little bit of an upsurge in like actual play, is like my favorite thing to watch is their episode 0 of
Mm.
seeing them build the world, because it's I think a testament to the fact that no matter how creative you are as a game designer, no matter how cool the setting, there's going to
Mm.
be people that come up with stuff on their own that's
Yeah.
10 times as awesome, and you're
Yeah.
kicking yourself for not thinking of it. I don't have to kick myself for not thinking of it,
No. No.
because I'm enforcing, or I'm reinforcing that aspect of it, that they're going
Yeah.
to go and make it awesome. So
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess when you listen to somebody's session zero, also you start to see the enthusiasm coming on. Huh? It's like, oh yeah, yeah, and let's do this. Oh, let's make it like that. Yeah,
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 totally.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's kind of how I was thinking about introducing this game to one of my role playing groups, and I thought, yeah, that's what I hope would come out of it is that we're sitting each in our own houses, sadly because of the
Sure.
pandemic, but we'd be doing this online. Um, and
Yeah, and yeah, if you go through and do the session zero, and there's
mm,
that investment, right? That people are sort of excited to explore the world now.
yeah,
They've invented their, they've got their pieces of it that they've staked claim to just as part of that exercise.
yeah,
And it's not a blank slate for everybody else coming in, that the GM sort of has all this knowledge in their head and
yeah,
they have to give everybody all the information.
yeah,
Everybody's
yeah,
everybody's
yeah,
got that baseline understanding.
yeah, exactly, yeah, yeah. Because very often I find as a game master, you're almost forced to do this enormous info dump on people. Like, okay, this is the world, this is the setting, this is how the stuff works. It's, oh yeah, oh by the way, priests are blah blah, and this. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
and then you see some faces going like, I just want to play a game. Come on. Yeah, 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 exactly. Yeah, so I got yeah, I was my interest was piqued quite a lot by that. I thought, wow, and I'm very curious how that will translate to. I think the name is Starforge, right? The Ironsworn in space.
Yeah. The cool thing about science fiction
Mm.
is, if anything, it's even broader a genre than fantasy is, right?
Yeah,
It's even more expansive in terms of
yeah,
possibilities.
yeah. But I
So
find
one
that,
of
yeah,
one of
sorry.
the challenges for me is, I'm not trying to create the game as a toolkit that's going to encompass everything from, you know uh, Star Trek to Star Wars to the Expanse
Yeah,
to the Princess of Mars, right? I
uh-huh.
think you could do all that with a little bit of hacking, but
Yeah,
when you create something that's for everything, I think you sort of create nothing at the same time, right? So it's
yeah,
about putting a few sort of boundaries up and then deciding how much play there is within that.
yeah.
So it's a little bit more challenging for me as a from a designer aspect than I think.
Yeah, I can imagine that because I find as a game master also, I find science fiction is always I've been drawn to it and I've always had difficulty running it.
Yeah.
It's precisely because it's so broad and there's so many possibilities. Especially once they have a spaceship, it's
Yeah, and can go anywhere, and yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and there's, your players will all interpret technology different ways. So you
yeah,
either have, you have a super robust equipment list that has a ton of detail on what things do and how they function,
yeah,
or you hand wave it, or,
yeah,
um, but I think where I'm heading with it will um, provide a good foundation for everybody sort of getting on the same page with that.
yeah. And do you think it will it go more in the direction of things like Star Trek or more expansive? I know I'm asking the wrong question, maybe, but I'm just too curious.
Uh, yeah, the aesthetic is, I've called it the scavenged future. So
Mm,
it's a little bit carrying like, or Iron Ages sci-fi maybe. So it's a little bit
mhm,
like, you know, post-apocalypse, not quite the right word, but it's a little bit more like a cobbled together future. So think like what typically people call like the used future of Star Wars, like Star Wars Out on
mhm.
the Outer Rim and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah,
So a little bit more of that aesthetic, a little bit of like Alien with like retro future, in terms of like, CRT screens and stuff like that
yeah, yeah.
potentially. So
Okay.
so less like advanced AI and jumping between consciousness and all those other things that
Yeah,
the probable sort of sci-fi future allows, and a little bit more sort of scrappy seat of the pants
yeah.
science fiction. That's all the default anyway.
Okay. Okay. Wow, that sounds great. Gosh darn it! How long are we gonna have to wait for this? What?
Probably too long. I don't know. We'll see.
All right. Well, I'll keep an eye on it. Yeah, and so one question that I ask every single one of my guests, obviously, is because I invite people that I consider to be a hero for some reason or another in RPGs, and I think with you, it's pretty clear that first of all, I think you made a very creative, very interesting product that if even if you're not going to play it, can give you enormous ideas for the games that you do play. Like for instance, the that world building exercise, like I can see myself doing that for any RPG that I would play,
Yeah,
with a group.
it's unhinged from the mechanics. So
Yeah, yeah, and it helps you to, like you say, to kind of set the tone and set the expectations correctly, because there's all kinds of ways to do a session zero, but I find with games that are GM'd, that often, yeah, you already have kind of an idea, so you're taking a few of those steps already, and then saying, "Hey, would you like to do this?"
right.
Um, yeah, and so that even if you're not going to play it, you're definitely going to take some cool ideas from it. But to my listeners, I would suggest pick it up and play it, because bloody hell, it's free. Uh, even just for that, and that you know I find that also very, what something that you and a lot of my previous guests or heroes have in common is that you do a lot of really hard work, for seemingly no real profit in mind, and I think that's amazing that you give all your time to us and create these things and create platforms to talk about them. So then my question to you is, do you have a personal hero when it comes to RPGs?
There's certainly a lot of people I admire, a lot of game designers, creative people I admire in the industry. I guess I'd have to go to my son, who I do the podcast with. It was like
Mm,
my personal RPG hero. I did when he was young. We did a little bit of gaming together, um, not too often, but occasionally.
mm,
And then he went off to college and got a little bit involved in tabletop role playing. And out of college, he ended up founding a company basically with three guys that he met online, Absolute Tabletop.
yeah,
So Matt Click and Michael James and Tim, they're all sort of founders of that. And they've been going for several years now and produced, I don't know, a few dozen supplements and
yeah,
many successful Kickstarters. And
yeah.
number one, I'm super proud of him just because of how creative he is.
Mm,
He's an amazing GM, has an amazing channel on YouTube called Fistful of Dice.
mhm,
And number two, seeing him and his cohort producing this great stuff. He was in his 20s at the time, and I'm in my 50s now. And I was thinking, I should probably buckle down. And like, I keep sort of thinking about doing these things. I should do it. So you're
yeah.
certainly a big part of the motivation for me of admiring what he had done
Mm,
and wanted to do some of that myself.
yeah. That's so cool. So actually, you kind of followed in your son's footsteps rather than the other way around, kind of,
Yeah,
when it
a
comes
little
to
bit.
RPG design. Yeah.
A little bit, and he's
Mm,
his team's mostly involved with D&D 5e stuff, and
mhm,
I've always sort of, at least for the past decade or so, leaned more into sort of the narrative side of RPGs. So it's just
yeah.
our own sort of take on things, and that's actually a second shout out on your podcast, by the way.
Yeah.
'Cause Nate from WSD,
Yeah.
I
He
think
also
so.
made.
He's a hero twice, so maybe you need
Wow.
to
I
have
need
him
to.
on.
Yeah, exactly. I'm gonna need to talk to your son.
It's actually weird because I don't have much involvement or interaction with the RPG community. I'm a
Hmm.
little siloed here, but
Right.
for some reason, your podcast, like I know I've met Hankerin a couple times.
Yeah.
I admire him a lot.
Uh-huh.
Nate, I've met a couple times. He picked up my Annie last year. It
Oh,
was very nice to pick up my Annie. So there's
yeah.
this weird, like your podcast for some reason has my limited diaspora of people I happen to know on
Wow,
all
yeah.
fake guests.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, so I'll definitely make a point of inviting Matt. I hope he'll agree to do an interview. Maybe you can give him a friendly push.
Yeah, I think I have a little bit of influencer.
Excellent. Great. Cool. Well, and I think that makes it also one of the most heartwarming answers to that questions I've heard so far. So that's cool. And I think it's just wonderful you can have that kind of relationship with your son, regardless of what it's about. Uh, yeah, that's
For
wonderful.
sure.
Great, and I think that makes for a wonderful ending to this interview. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to talk to you. I appreciate you having me on. Thanks.
So, if you've never tried a solo role playing game, I think the main takeaway here is give it a go, try it out. And as you heard in the beginning, there are many ways to do it, and there are many reasons to do it, even if it's just for the fact that sometimes we just have a short bit of time to ourselves. Let's play an RPG. Why not? I think what's really fascinating about Ironsworn is that it has this co-op mode, which is, I think, just perfect for couples and families, and also for the forever game master who just wants to play for a change without asking somebody else to be the game master. I think a lot of the challenge in solo role-playing comes from the feeling that it could be a bit pointless or aimless sometimes, and you end up kind of playing hot seat between game master and player with yourself. And so you need the right tools and the right ideas to kind of keep you going. And one of the most interesting things about the Session Zero aspect of Ironsworn is this world-building exercise, which I think is a great idea that would translate to a lot of different role-playing games, not just Ironsworn. Well, that's it for episode 9. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed recording. If you did, please consider leaving a 5-star review on iTunes. It really helps to get the podcast get heard. Want to keep up with the latest news about my podcast? Then hop on over to Twitter at RPGHeroes1. Check out the full show notes with all the links at rpgheroes.buzzsprout.com. Want to support the show and join other supporters on my Discord channel? Then I would be honored if you check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/rpgheroes. You can also buy RPG products with my affiliate code. Check the show notes. 2 weeks from now, I'll be talking to Thomas Herenstam from Free League about post-apocalyptic RPGs. Until then, stay heroic.